Welcome to First Sleep Aid, calm stories to help you unwind, learn, and fall asleep. From true crime to curious facts and thoughtful ideas, always softly spoken. Subscribe now and take a deep breath. You're in good hands. Okay, let's dive in. We're going back to Los Angeles, January 15th, 1947. It's a Wednesday morning, a bit cooler than usual for LA.
Right. And in Lambert Park, a pretty quiet residential area back then, something truly awful is about to break the morning calm.
Yeah, a woman is out walking. She has her little girl with her, just running an errand, I think.
Heading to a shoe repair shop, a very normal post-war California morning kind of thing.
And she sees something in this empty lot. Something pale.
At first, she actually thinks it's maybe a mannequin, discarded, because of the way it was positioned. Stiff, sort of arched.
But as she gets closer, the reality hits. And it's horrific.
It is. It's a body, a young woman's body. And it's posed, bisected, clean cut at the waist.
Arms raised up, legs apart, just arranged there.
The skin, incredibly white, like
Yeah.
all the blood had been drained, which we later learned it essentially had been.
And then there's the mouth.
Yeah, cut ear to ear. This grotesque, fixed smile. It's not just violence, it's theatrical. Chillingly so.
And what's missing is almost as shocking, right? No blood at the scene, no signs of a fight, no clothes.
Exactly, just the body, placed there with this unsettling precision.
It doesn't take long for everything to descend. Police arrive first.
Then the press, of course.
Hmm.
And then the crowds. That quiet lot becomes, well, probably the most talked about piece of land in LA within hours.
You can imagine the scene. It wasn't just a murder. It felt like, I don't know, a statement. But who was it for?
And who was she? No ID, no purse, nothing. Initially, her fingerprints didn't match anything on file.
But the newspapers, they didn't wait for facts, did they? They needed a name, a hook.
Right. And they came up with one pretty quickly.
The Black Dahlia.
Playing off that movie, The Blue Dahlia. It sounded dark, mysterious, film noir.
And it stuck instantly. This invented name, the Black Dahlia, it just exploded. And it completely overshadowed the actual person.
She wasn't famous at all in life. But this made her an icon in death, in the worst possible way. And the myth just kept growing. Fed by the media frenzy, the public's fascination, the fear, suspects named, confessions coming out of the woodwork, letters supposedly from the killer.
But total spectacle.
Absolutely. A media storm.
And lost in all of that was the real person, Elizabeth Short. She was only 22.
Just 22.
Yeah.
Came to California chasing that classic dream, seeking the light, the sunshine, the opportunity.
Only to be, well, devoured by its shadows, as the outline puts it. It's tragic.
Utterly. And the fact that her murder is still unsolved just
Right.
adds another layer, doesn't it? It ensures the story never really goes away.
Which is why we need to look beyond the headlines, beyond the nickname. Who was Elizabeth Short?
Okay, let's go back. Before the Dahlia, she was born July 29, 1924. Not in California, but Hyde Park, Massachusetts.
But raised mostly in Medford, just north of Boston.
Right. Third of 5 daughters. Cleo and Phoebe Short were her parents. Pretty standard middle-class Catholic family for the time.
Her dad designed miniature golf courses. That's
Yeah.
unusual.
It is a bit quirky, yeah. Phoebe was a homemaker, raised the girls.
And Beth, as they called her. Descriptions always mention her looks, even as a kid.
Very striking. Pale skin, these deep eyes, raven hair. People noted a kind of stillness about her, almost observant.
And this feeling she had, wanting something warmer, farther away.
It seemed so. Like she was already looking beyond Medford, even then. But something happened early on that cast a long shadow. Her father.
Right, 1930. She's only 6. His car is found abandoned on a bridge.
And everyone assumes suicide. It's the Depression. Times were incredibly tough. A devastating blow for Phoebe and the girls.
But that wasn't the truth, was it?
No. Much harsher, in a way. Years later, they find out he'd faked his death, just walked away, abandoned them, and moved to California.
Wow, imagine finding that out later. That's a deep wound.
Definitely described as the first real fracture in her young life. Abandonment is a recurring theme, sadly.
And she had health problems too, right? Respiratory issues?
Yes, bronchitis and quite severe asthma. New England winters would have been brutal for her.
So the doctors actually advised her to go south.
They did. By her teens, she started spending winters down in Florida, Miami, staying with family friends.
That must have been such a contrast. The cold, maybe restrictive north versus the sun and warmth of Florida. A taste of a different world.
A much bigger world. And it seems like after that, Medford never really felt like home again.
She finished high school, but no college.
No. Worked various jobs, waitress, clerk, receptionist, just trying to make her way.
But the Hollywood dream was already there.
Oh, yeah. Sending glamour shots, writing these elegant letters, talking about being a movie star. It was a common dream then.
But not necessarily pursued aggressively. The notes say her ambitions were soft.
Right. More like a hope, a wish, that someone might just give her a chance, recognize something in her.
And her personality seems complex, too. Not just a naive dreamer.
No, descriptions paint a picture of someone gentle but also guarded. Curious but maybe not quick to trust.
Liked attention, but needed an escape hatch.
Exactly. Flirtatious, maybe, but not reckless. There was this vulnerability, but also a part she kept hidden, unavailable.
Almost like she was a blank canvas, in a way. People could project onto her.
That's a really insightful way to put it. That incompleteness might have allowed others to see what they wanted to see in her.
So before all the horror, before the headlines and the name, just Beth, dark hair, that history with her father, looking for warmth in California, unaware of the shadows.
Completely unaware.
So she gets to California, early 1940s, not glamorous, arrives by bus.
Young, hopeful, and very much alone, trading that New England chill for the promise of L.A.
But LA wasn't just sunshine and movie sets, it was a system.
A tough system, especially for a young woman with no money or connections. A machine that could chew people up.
Her first stop was trying to live with her father, Cleo, the one who'd faked his death, in Vallejo.
Yes, the reunion didn't last long. Apparently they argued about her clothes, her wanting independence. He wanted control, she needed freedom.
So she left, and was truly on her own then.
Completely. Which led to this transient life. Boarding houses, cheap apartments, rooms over diners, behind bus stations, always moving.
Struggling with rent, finding work where she could, waitressing, clerical, movie theater counter.
Dating servicemen, writing letters, seeking connection, but nothing really stable ever formed.
And she maintained this persona, right? Telling people she was an actress, waiting for her break.
Yeah, hinting at screen tests, that big call that was always just about to come. We don't have hard proof of any real acting gigs.
But maybe it wasn't outright lying, more like living the hope.
Exactly. Trying to write herself into the Hollywood story she so desperately wanted to be a part of. Blurring that line between hope and reality.
The way she dressed played into that too. The high heels, the tight skirts, the flower in her hair, always black clothes.
Not mourning, but definition, maybe.
Yeah.
Standing out. Her soft voice, that pale skin. Always dressed like something important was about to happen.
Standing out, but not necessarily being seen. There's a difference in LA.
The huge difference. She was living, as someone put it, mid-audition. Always almost discovered.
Yeah.
But reality keeps breaking in for women without money or protection.
She had charm, beauty, looked like she belonged in the dream, but couldn't quite write her own script.
That seems to capture it well. So she drifted. Santa Barbara, Hollywood, San Diego, L.A., 1943 to 1946. Staying with acquaintances, sometimes men.
Got arrested for underage drinking once. Claimed engagements to soldiers who didn't come back.
Living on borrowed time, borrowed places. But always with that spark, that hope still flickering.
It wasn't failing, was it? It was surviving.
Exactly. And survival in that world, especially then, was a full-time performance in itself.
You paint a vivid picture of Hollywood then. Shimmering, mythic, but cruel.
Deeply cruel beneath the surface. It promised visibility, fame, but the risk of erasure was constant. For every star, hundreds like Beth were just unseen, pretty, polite, persistent, invisible.
A ghost in waiting. That's a powerful phrase. Afternoons in diners, evenings in cheap clubs, nights on borrowed couches.
Not a criminal drifter, but an emotional one. Drifting through lives, through broken promises.
And those letters she wrote, full of longing, flirtation, performance.
Yeah, writing wishes as if they were real. To friends, soldiers, strangers. Trying to connect, maybe trying to convince herself too.
And her look, the black clothes, white skin, flower, almost like armor.
A kind of defense, maybe? Posing not just for vanity, but to avoid being overlooked or maybe misunderstood. A way to control the narrative about herself, however small.
Her reliance on men for basics, shelter, rides, meals, safety. It speaks volumes about the time.
It really does. For women without family, money, or a husband, the expectation was often to trade charm or more for stability. Beth seemed to just hope for it freely.
But LA doesn't often give freely.
Rarely. And this led to assumptions, didn't it? Even though there was no evidence of sex work, her poverty, her looks, being alone.
Society jumps to conclusions, and those assumptions became her story after she died.
Tragically, yes. Even if untrue. She lived in these borrowed shadows, the light always just ahead. Friends, but no anchors. Jobs, but no career. Dates, but little trust.
Always dressing the part, hoping the city would mistake her for someone it cared about.
And the ultimate tragedy. She only became truly visible once she was gone.
That process of vanishing. It's gradual, isn't it? A missed call, a room left empty.
A big city just swallows people up sometimes, especially someone quiet, unanchored. Then, silence.
The last confirmed sighting, January 9th, 1947, the Biltmore Hotel lobby.
Right. Downtown LA, grand, a bit faded maybe, full of ghosts of other people's hopes. She told staff she was waiting for her sister.
A sister she didn't have.
No. She left around 10 p.m. that night. Before that, just more drifting between San Diego and Hollywood.
She'd been with Robert Red Manley just before that, the salesman.
Yeah. Married man she knew. Seems platonic, though they had a room with twin beds. He dropped her at the Biltmore on January 8th, said thanks, smiled, and vanished.
And the next 6 days, just a blank, filled with rumors.
Total void. Whispers of sightings in bars, Long Beach, hitchhiking. None provable.
And in that gap, the terrible story gets written, her actual movements erased, only the ending remembered.
The next time she's seen, it's in that lot. Leimert Park. Naked, mutilated, presented. A message that she's gone.
Her body told more about her death than anyone could tell about those last days of her life. Tortured, cut with surgical precision.
Drained of blood, washed clean, posed, rope marks. That awful carved smile.
No one knew where, with whom, or why. Just absence.
And it connects back to that idea. Violence against women often starts not with blood, but with indifference. No one asking where she was until it was too late.
She didn't just die when found. She died piece by piece as people stopped seeing her. Only the story they projected onto her.
Until they could only see the story, not the girl.
So, January 15th, just after 10 a.m., cold, clear morning in Leimert Park.
Betty Bersinger walking with her 3-year-old daughter. Ordinary errand.
Sees that pale shape in the empty lot. Brown grass, quiet. Thinks it's a mannequin.
Because of the pose. Stiff, clean, arched. Unnatural.
She gets closer. And then the scream.
Understandably. The reality is horrifying. The deliberate posing. Upper half on her back, arms bent. Lower half about a foot away, legs spread.
Severed cleanly at the waist. No blood visible, no drag marks, no struggle. Just placed there. Calmly, almost.
Deeply unsettling calm. Police are called, then the press, then the onlookers. That crime scene becomes instantly famous, documented from every angle.
And even hardened investigators are shocked by the precision.
Exactly. Drained of blood elsewhere, washed, scrubbed. No fingerprints left at the scene itself. No clothes, purse, ID, just the remains. Displayed.
And that mouth slit ear to ear, not just horror, but a grotesque parody. A smile.
News spreads like wildfire. Gruesome murder. Headlines screaming before they even know her name. Who is she? Young, pale, dark-haired, carefully undressed and left.
Identification comes later, through fingerprints mailed to the FBI. Still a relatively new method then.
Right. They match her to Elizabeth Short, 22, from Massachusetts, and they find that one prior arrest, the underage drinking thing in Santa Barbara.
And that one minor arrest. That becomes the seed, doesn't it? The excuse for rewriting her reputation almost immediately.
Instantly, the story shifts. It's no longer just about a murdered woman. It's about the Black Dahlia. And the city, hungry for sensation, is ready to believe almost anything.
Let's talk about the crime scene itself. The anatomy of that horror. You mentioned the precision.
It's key. No blood, no signs of panic. It feels less like a frenzied attack and more like a message. Or worse, some kind of grotesque installation.
Not what you'd expect from a typical murder scene. This felt methodical.
Eerily so. The bisection itself, a hemicorporectomy. That's not common. It requires significant anatomical knowledge. How to cut through the lumbar spine cleanly, avoiding the spinal cord.
Between L2 and L3, the reports say. Suggests practice, maybe the right tools, possibly someone with surgical training.
It's a strong possibility. And the lack of blood at the scene confirms she was killed elsewhere, drained, cleaned, then transported and posed.
The body was scrubbed clean.
Wiped smooth. Intestines tucked neatly beneath the buttocks. Arranged, not just left scattered. It's incredibly meticulous.
And the other injuries. Rope marks, cuts.
Extensive mutilation. Rope marks on wrists and ankles, consistent with being bound. Cuts and abrasions on her thighs, torso. And those deep Glasgow smile cuts on her face.
The coroner determined she was tortured. Alive for some of it.
Yes. Hemorrhaging indicated injuries inflicted while alive. Signs of sexual assault, but no definitive evidence of rape. No defensive wounds, suggesting she was restrained or incapacitated early on. Given up hope, perhaps?
And around the body, almost nothing.
Virtually nothing. No blood trail, no tire tracks, no clear footprints, except maybe a heel print. There was a cement sack nearby, possibly stained with blood, maybe used to carry part of the body. But everything else stripped away.
LAPD must have been overwhelmed.
Completely. Underprepared for something this staged, the symbolic. They recognized it wasn't just murder. There was intent behind the display. The killer wanted the body found exactly like this.
Not rage, not sloppy, not rushed. Staged. A tableau.
Yes. Elizabeth didn't die quietly, but her body was displayed in total silence. And that clean, deliberate, monstrous silence, that's what really terrified the city, maybe even more than the gore itself.
Let's bring in the medical examiner's report. Dr. Newbar, what did it officially tell us?
It confirmed a lot of the scene observations, but added grim detail. It wasn't just a cause of death report, it was like a manual for cruelty, as someone described it.
Her basic stats?
22 years old, about 5'5", maybe 115 pounds. Face made surreal by that post-mortem Glasgow smile.
And injuries while alive?
Hemorrhaging from facial cuts, shock from blows to the head, blunt force trauma, those deep cuts from rope bindings on wrists and ankles, slashes on thighs and breasts, more about dehumanization than killing her quickly.
There were other disturbing findings too, weren't there?
Yes. Traces of feces in her stomach, suggesting forced ingestion. Her anus was dilated, but no semen found. Could indicate post-mortem staging or a form of sexual sadism focused on control and degradation, not necessarily completion in the conventional sense.
That's a bisection. Definitely post-mortem.
Confirmed post-mortem. Surgical accuracy again. Cold. Detached. A steady hand. Anatomical knowledge. Clean cut through the L2 vertebra. Whoever did this knew exactly how to separate a human body.
Anything else? Pregnancy? Tattoos?
No signs of pregnancy, no tattoos, fingernails were broken.
Time of death estimate?
Roughly 10 to 12 hours before she was found. So sometime during the night of January 14th into the early morning of the 15th.
But the report left so many questions unanswered.
Huge questions. Where was she held? Why the meticulous cleaning? Why remove all prints from the scene but leave them on her body? Why this specific ritualistic display?
The report ends with mystery. No known duration of torture, no perpetrator ID'd, no explanation for the killer's composure.
She was, as the source material says, converted from a person into a symbol that only grew colder and more enigmatic under the morgue's lights.
Let's emphasize what wasn't there at the scene. That absence is so telling.
It really is. No blood, no prints, no chaos, just design. The killer left a blueprint of intent, not panic.
Murder is usually messy, right? Struggle, blood spray, signs of rage or fear.
Impulse. None of that here.
Yeah.
This was composed. The real horror lies in the care taken and what was deliberately erased.
No blood at all at the scene, meaning she was drained elsewhere.
Completely drained. Likely post-mortem, using gravity and time. That takes hours, requires an undisturbed location, which is never found.
No defensive wounds on her hands or arms.
Suggests she was incapacitated early, or the restraints were absolute, eliminating any chance to fight back.
No fingerprints anywhere. Not on her body, the cement sack, that heel print.
Surgical absence.
Huh.
Gloves, maybe bleach, certainly careful planning. The killer managed her death like a meticulous set designer.
No weapon found, no car seen dumping the body, no neighbors recalling anything unusual.
Dumped, posed, and left in a residential area. And nobody saw a thing. Utterly chilling.
No jewelry, clothes, purse, nothing about who she was, only what was done to her.
The killer wanted the public to see, react, be afraid. But not understand. Not really.
There's a chilling restraint to it all. It could have been more chaotic, more overtly theatrical, perhaps, but it was exact.
The work of someone completely in control. Not losing it, but executing a plan. And that control, maybe even more than the mutilation or the bloodless skin or the carved face, that's what haunted the detectives the most.
He left no trace, only design. In that clean, open space where chaos should have been, only one truth remained.
He wanted us to look.
By January 16th, the day after the discovery, this case just exploded. Front pages everywhere.
The brutality, the mystery, the theatricality, it was the perfect storm for the press.
And the LAPD, suddenly thrust into the spotlight. This wasn't just another murder. It felt like a test of their legitimacy.
They failed to prevent it. Now the pressure was immense to solve it. But behind the scenes, the LAPD, well, they weren't really equipped for this.
LA was this mix of glamour and crime, sunshine and deep corruption. The department was often underfunded, disorganized, swayed by politics and the press.
Detectives Hansen and Brown, the leads, were competent, sure. But this case needed something more. A forensic genius, a psychologist, a surgeon, all rolled into one.
And those first 48 hours were crucial, but chaotic.
A total media circus. The crime scene was trampled, evidence potentially compromised, witnesses giving conflicting accounts. Thin leads were already fracturing.
Thousands of tips pouring in.
Absolutely. Every man in LA suddenly felt like a potential suspect. Women were warned to be careful. The public demanded progress. The papers demanded suspects. LAPD was chasing shadows, struggling just to control the narrative.
They interviewed hundreds of people quickly.
Over 150 in the first week, more than 300 the first month. But nobody could place her in those final missing hours. No one saw her taken. No one could explain how this happened unnoticed.
And then came the letters.
Ah, yes. January 24th.
Yeah.
A note arrives at the LA Examiner. Typed, almost polite. Here's Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow.
And inside, her birth certificate, social security card, photos, things belonging to Elizabeth Short.
All wiped clean of prints. Wrapped in newspaper, mailed downtown. The killer, or someone pretending to be, was watching. Wanted to be part of the story.
I must have ramped up the pressure immensely.
Doubled, tripled it. The deeper they dug, the more tangled everything became. They started arresting suspects on flimsy leads, grabbing headlines rather than solid evidence. Anyone with a surgical background, a criminal record, an unaccounted-for hour.
They were running out of time, not just to solve it, but to stay ahead of the media frenzy.
Exactly. The longer it went unsolved, the less it became about the murder investigation and more about a crisis of public confidence in the police.
Their one job was to catch the killer. Instead, they were getting dragged down by the very myth they inadvertently helped create.
The lack of real answers created a vacuum, and the public rushed to fill it. Some lied for attention, others confessed for reasons we can only guess at. The case started drowning in its own echo chamber.
Hundreds of tips in the first week, over 1,000 in the first month. Most led nowhere.
Right. Many seemed promising initially, but fizzled out. And the pressure was just relentless. They pushed sensational theories, floated suspects who'd never even met her. Photos of Elizabeth, sometimes altered, were everywhere.
The public was horrified, but also captivated.
Gruesome details sold newspapers. It was a morbid fascination.
And people started inserting themselves into the story. Letters claiming inside knowledge, confessions.
Loads of them. Men walking into precincts confessing in graphic detail. One guy confessed vividly, but turned out he was overseas when she was killed. Another said he did it based on a dream. Some were drunk, some clearly mentally ill, some just desperate to be seen.
Over 60 confessions eventually.
At least. Dozens offered disturbing, plausible-sounding details, but those details were usually things that had already been published in the papers. Public knowledge.
LAPD had to chase every single one down, though.
They had no choice. Vetting confessions, analyzing letters, following rumors, each one potentially leading them further away from the actual killer.
And the media wasn't always helpful, to put it mildly. That story about the LA Examiner calling her mother.
Predatory is the word. Pretending Elizabeth had won a beauty contest just to get personal information from her grieving mother before revealing she'd been murdered. It's sickening.
So hoaxes, bad reporting, theatrical confessions, it all just muddied the waters.
Made the investigation almost untrustworthy.
Yeah.
Every new lead just added more fog. The case wasn't just complicated by confusion, it was actively hijacked by the spectacle.
And every false lead just gave the real killer more time, more space to disappear.
The city wanted closure, the papers wanted drama, the police wanted progress. All anyone really had was noise. And Elizabeth Short's own voice, her real story, was completely lost in it.
She wasn't a celebrity in life, but the city certainly made her one in death, at the cost of her own name, really.
Absolutely. That name, Black Dahlia, first appeared in the LA Herald Express just days after the discovery. Where did it even come from?
Nobody knows for sure. Maybe drugstore clerks who knew her, reporters riffing on the movie title. It doesn't matter, almost. It stuck.
And it was perfect, in a dark way. Poetic, macabre, marketable. Elizabeth Short, the person vanished. Replaced by the Black Dahlia, this noir archetype, a mystery wrapped in black lace and tragedy.
The murder itself was horrifying, but the aesthetic almost became irresistible.
And the newspapers built that image piece by piece. Aspiring actress, lonely drifter, known to many men, always wore black, a taste for danger. So much of it wasn't even true, but it sounded true in that context.
She never acted in a film. By all accounts, she wasn't promiscuous. She was just a young woman, alone, without protection or a voice, and now everyone was speaking for her.
The press shaped her perception like sculptors, cherry-picking facts, elevating speculation, blurring the lines between the victim and the narrative until you couldn't separate them. She became an object, a mystery, something to be gazed at, interpreted, not mourned or understood.
And this created panic, didn't it? Not just fear of the violence itself.
But the idea that an ordinary person could suddenly become this extraordinary, horrifying symbol in death, if it can happen to her, this girl next door type, what about other young women alone in the city?
People started locking their doors, parents warned their daughters, LAPD cracked down on moral behavior.
As if the danger lay in women's freedom, not in the man who was still out there. It's classic misdirection.
And even as the investigation stalled, the myth just got stronger.
In the myth, Elizabeth became whatever the culture needed her to be. A warning, a femme fatale, a cautionary tale. A victim so stylized she almost looked fictional. And that fiction sold then, and it still sells now.
Books, movies, podcasts like this one, endless conspiracies.
But beneath it all, there was just a young woman who never asked for any of this, just wanted to belong somewhere. And she became a headline that refuses to die.
So who was she really? Beyond the myth, beyond the projections?
It's tough because she's been portrayed as everything. Siren, socialite, lost girl, cautionary tale. The truth, as usual, is probably quieter, harder to summarize.
Not rich, not famous, not particularly rebellious.
By most accounts, kind, soft-spoken, sometimes shy, sometimes projecting confidence. Just a young woman trying to find her place, like so many others in post-war America.
Loved movies, glamour, writing those elegant letters.
Sent postcards, carried photos, sometimes embellished her life a bit in her stories, maybe hope phrased as fact, rather than outright lies.
Had friends, but often briefly, moved around a lot, trusted selectively.
Stayed just long enough to be remembered, then seemed to drift away again. Some found her radiant, others almost forgettable. She had this presence that seemed to invite projection, like you said earlier. A mirror, not necessarily a mask.
She wasn't inherently a drifter, was she? She drifted because she had no anchor.
Exactly. Distant family, few real opportunities, no college degree, no stable work history, none of the protections women often needed then just to survive safely.
Yet she kept going, kept believing there was a place for her, a chance to start over.
Not seeking fame or infamy, perhaps, just safety, companionship, a room of her own, stability.
She wasn't that unusual. Maybe that's why the story resonates. Not iconic, but recognizable.
A young woman in the wrong place at the worst possible time. She had dreams, not extravagant ones, maybe just to act a little, get married, feel like she mattered. She had fears, and some came terrifyingly true. She had flaws, like everyone.
We focus so much on the body, the pose, the cuts, the nickname.
But the human story is maybe less about how she was destroyed and more about how, perhaps, no one really helped her live, how the system failed her while she was alive.
Elizabeth Short was 22, wanted warmth, beauty, maybe love. She didn't find much of it.
But somewhere, behind the photos and the falsehoods, the real Beth is still there, waiting to be seen as a person, not just a symbol.
Let's go back to those letters, the ones after the murder, specifically the one from the Black Dahlia Avenger.
Right. It didn't just bring horror, it brought participation. The killer, or someone claiming to be, inserting themselves directly into the investigation, into the narrative.
January 24th, 9 days after the body was found, an envelope arrives at the LA Examiner.
Type in block letters. Clean, precise, weirdly unemotional.
And inside, her birth certificate, business card, social security card, personal photos, even a claim check for a suitcase she'd left at a downtown bus station, all belonging to Elizabeth Short.
And all meticulously cleaned, likely with gasoline, wiped of fingerprints, wrapped deliberately in newspaper. It's pure performance, not panic.
Accompanied by that short note, here's Dolly's belongings, letter to follow, and signed.
The Black Dahlia Avenger. Chilling. LAPD and the press knew immediately. The killer was watching, taunting them, or someone wanted them to think so.
Then another letter arrived a couple of days later.
Yes. Also typed, precise. Offering to give himself up if he got just 10 years. Almost childlike grammar, a mocking tone, and a postscript. Had my fun at police.
And then more followed. Postcards, notes cut from magazines.
Ransom note style, some with threats, some with riddles. One just said, "Heaven is here," often signed the Black Dahlia Avenger.
Most of these later ones were likely hoaxes, right?
Almost certainly. Copycats, attention seekers. The field was flooded with them.
But that first envelope, the one with her actual belongings, that felt real.
It had to be. It contained items, like the claim check, that weren't public knowledge yet. Only the killer, or someone very close to the situation, could have possessed them. It meant the killer wasn't done. Not with Elizabeth, not with the story, not with the audience.
And the suitcase they recovered, using the claim check, what was inside?
Clothes, more letters from lovers, or perhaps just admirers, and significantly, an address book. It listed over 75 names, mostly men. But crucial pages had been erased. Someone had physically tried to rub the ink out, wiping away her connection.
Who did she know? Who might have betrayed her? The suitcase offered clues, but also more silence. It whispered that someone wanted her untraceable.
The press ran the letters, of course. The public ate it up. The myth grew louder, more complex. The killer, real or imagined, became a participant, actively writing headlines, framing the conversation, turning murder into theater.
Still no arrest, no credible suspect pinned down, no fingerprints matching anyone, just a name. This taunting voice and the growing sense the killer wasn't just hiding.
He was directing.
Okay, let's talk about suspects. This case has generated so many over the years, but one name consistently surfaces with a particularly dark shadow. George Hodel.
Dr. George Hodel, a figure who seems almost too perfectly cast for the role of a sophisticated, sadistic killer. Brilliant, but deeply disturbed.
On paper, very impressive. Child prodigy, IQ, multilingual, graduated Berkeley Young, became a doctor specializing in VD, ironically enough.
In 1947, he lived in this incredible, sprawling house on Franklin Avenue in Hollywood, the Sowden House, designed by Lloyd Wright, Frank Lloyd Wright's son.
And inspired.
This fortress of shadow and stone, it looked secretive, like a place built for unseen things.
He moved in elite circles, parties with artists, intellectuals, movie people.
Oh, yes, collected modern art, read Freud, debated philosophy, very sophisticated veneer.
But underneath,
Something rotten, obsessed with sex, dominance, control. He had a reputation, especially with younger, vulnerable women. Predatory.
And then, in 1949, 2 years after the Dahlia murder, the police did investigate him.
For something horrific. Incest. His own 14-year-old daughter, Tamar, accused him of rape. Her testimony was apparently quite vivid. Hodel denied it, and he was acquitted. But the investigation led the LAPD to dig into his secrets.
They bugged his house.
Yes, in 1950. Planted listening devices in the Sowden house for weeks. Recorded his private conversations. And the transcripts, well, they contain some chilling lines.
The famous one. Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead.
Chilling. And another mention of payoff to law enforcement. The tapes were never made public during his lifetime. No charges related to the Dahlia were ever filed. The case went cold again. Hodel eventually left the country, lived in Asia for decades, effectively beyond the reach of U.S. law.
But the story didn't end there. Decades later, his own son.
Steve Hodel, a former LAPD homicide detective himself. After his father died, Steve started looking into his father's past, and he found disturbing things. Old photos, diaries, evidence of his father's surgical knowledge, violent fantasies, potential links to other unsolved murders, too.
And Steve became convinced his father was the Black Dahlia killer.
Absolutely. He wrote books laying out his case. Timelines, motives, geographical connections. His theory is that the Sowden house itself was the crime scene, that Elizabeth Short was murdered and dissected there.
LAPD never officially named George Hodel as the prime suspect, did they?
Never officially closed the case on him, but they never formally indicted him. Yet they also never definitively ruled him out. Many investigators, journalists, even psychologists find the evidence Steve Hodel compiled deeply compelling.
When you think about what the crime required, surgical skill, sadism, a theatrical flair, complete control, that desire to be seen but not caught.
Hodel doesn't just fit the profile. Some argue he might have practically written it. He remains, for many, the most plausible, if unproven, suspect.
But Hodel wasn't the only name seriously considered over the years. The investigation, both official and amateur, has thrown up dozens.
So many. Some seemed close for a while, some were pure invention, some people even wanted to be caught, and others just drift in and out of the narrative.
Mark Hansen, the nightclub owner.
Right. Beth lived at his home briefly, along with other young women. He gave her money, rides, shelter. Some speculated she rejected his advances shortly before her death. He was an early serious suspect.
But nothing concrete.
No physical evidence linking him directly. His alibi apparently checked out, but his closeness to Elizabeth always kept him on the periphery of suspicion.
Leslie Dillon, the bellhop obsessed with crime.
Yeah, an odd character. Wrote to the police showing interest, then seemed to reveal details not public knowledge. He was brought in, questioned intensely, claimed a mysterious friend might have done it, a friend who possibly never existed.
He was held illegally for a time.
Yes, and eventually released with no charges. Some insiders later whispered about a cover-up, maybe protecting others, but nothing was ever proven. He remains an enigmatic figure in the case.
Walter Bailey, the surgeon.
Respected doctor, lived near where the body was found. His daughter was friends with Elizabeth's sister. He died in 1948, just a year after the murder, apparently showing signs of mental decline.
So the theory is maybe a degenerative condition, a psychotic break.
Speculation based on proximity and profession, mostly. No direct evidence links him. Just another eerie coincidence, perhaps.
And then the wilder theories. Arnold Smith, Patrick O'Reilly, Orson Welles.
Wells gets mentioned sometimes because the crime scene was so theatrical, like something from a dark play, and he had that flair for illusion. Fascinating idea, but realistically, probably nonsense. Bugsy Siegel's name has been thrown around too, connected to organized crime.
And don't forget the 60-plus confessions.
So many confessions. Letters, people walking into stations, none ever verified or led to charges, many clearly delusional or seeking attention. But maybe one or two were closer to the truth than we know, lost in the noise.
The suspect list just grew and grew, not out of clarity, but almost desperation.
Exactly. And with each new theory, each potential suspect, Elizabeth Short herself receded further from view. She became less a specific victim of a specific killer, and more the center of this open wound onto which the city projected all its fears and dark fascinations.
The real tragedy behind all these theories isn't just that most are likely wrong.
It's that there are so many, and still so little actual truth, and no one left who can definitively answer the questions.
This story just won't die, and maybe the cost of that is we forget what we're trying to solve.
When mystery replaces the search for truth, the victim becomes a symbol. We stop asking who did this and start asking what does it all mean.
It's been over 75 years. Decades of investigations, confessions, books, movies, podcasts, theories from the surgical to the supernatural.
And still no resolution. The case is technically open, I believe, but nobody's actively working it. It's just a ghost the city has learned to live with.
The Black Dahlia became a genre, didn't it? Not a case, not a woman. A blueprint for a certain kind of crime story.
Absolutely. That noir aesthetic combined with feminine tragedy, turning horror into a kind of dark art, focusing on the victim's beauty juxtaposed with the ugliness of her end. It's seductive, cinematic, and dangerous.
Because the more the mystery is reimagined, the more Elizabeth Short disappears.
She becomes the pose in the field, the nickname, the cut smile. Not the daughter, the friend, the person. Just a symbol, flexible, profitable, ultimately unreal.
And there's a moral cost to that, isn't there? We obsess over how she was killed.
And stop asking why wasn't she protected. We fixate on who might have done it.
And overlook who didn't help her live.
The story lives on, partly because it's unsolved, sure, but maybe also because we need it to, in a way. It confirms a terrible fear that some people, especially vulnerable women alone, can just vanish into violence and then become entertainment.
It's inspired countless works, novels, paintings, video games, horror films, academic studies, forensic shows, even an opera I read.
Romanticizing a real woman's brutal end.
So the story continues, not because it's unfinished in terms of plot points maybe, but because we refuse to let it end, and in doing so, are we inadvertently carrying the killer's intention forward?
He wanted her seen, but not as a person, as an idea.
Yeah.
And arguably culture has largely given him that.
Hollywood in particular seems endlessly fascinated. She was never in the movies alive.
But she's become a permanent fixture on screen since her death. Cut, styled, mythologized.
She wanted to act, lived near the studios, dated industry types, wrote about her break, but it never came.
Yet in death, she became more cinematic than she could have ever imagined. Hollywood didn't just notice, it consumed her story. It had everything the screen loves.
Beautiful, mysterious woman, city of illusions, a brutal, almost artistic crime, unknown killer, no neat ending. It is real-life noir.
Exactly. Raw and unresolved. It became this narrative playground. Her name, or variations of it, pop up everywhere. L.A. Confidential, James Ellroy's novel The Black Dahlia, TV shows like American Horror Story, Cold Case, Penny Dreadful, the video game L.A. Noire, dozens of documentaries, thrillers, horror flicks.
And each one reinvents the mystery, reinterprets her face. Ellroy's novel, for example,
made her a catalyst for masculine obsession, a symbol of Hollywood's decay, this ghost haunting the city in lipstick and shadows. De Palma's film adaptation was glossy noir, stylized, eroticized, and incredibly brutal. Almost always more an idea than an individual.
But maybe these versions are also mourning something, reflecting that cultural obsession with beautiful dead women.
They definitely speak to how America often treats women in true crime stories. Victims, yes, but often framed more as muses figures to be looked at, puzzled over, desired, or feared rather than truly understood. Elizabeth Short became a blueprint for that particular gaze.
What's often missing is the banality of her real struggles. The long bus rides, the small disappointments, the constant grinding need for safety.
Her death wasn't poetic. It was painful, degrading, and likely avoidable if circumstances had been different.
Hollywood didn't invent the myth, but it certainly perfected it. Gave her a voice through other people's scripts, a body through actresses, a strange kind of immortality through stories.
But it also robbed her of ever just being ordinary. She never became a movie star, but she became something else entirely. A genre. A strange closed circle. Maybe that's why her story never rests.
We've seen the headlines, heard the legend, but before the Black Dahlia, there was just Beth.
Elizabeth Short. Almost everyone who actually knew her called her Beth. Not Liz. Certainly not Dahlia. It's so easy to forget that person behind the crime scene photos. That's how she ended, not who she was.
The real Beth. What glimpses do we have?
Soft-spoken, maybe a little shy, but could project confidence. Often wore black because she liked how it looked. Had a nervous laugh, apparently. Smoked menthol cigarettes. Loved romantic movies. Dreamed of being in one herself.
Posed for photos, head tilted just so. Maybe smiling without showing how badly she wanted to be truly seen.
That feels plausible. She didn't come from wealth or scandal. That broken home in Massachusetts, her mother working constantly, her father's disappearance. She carried that wound, that ache of abandonment, the lack of male protection.
Sometimes mistook attention for care, perhaps.
Possibly. Not inherently wild or reckless, it seems, but definitely alone in a city that can feed on loneliness. Moving from room to room, borrowing couches, borrowing time, flirting maybe out of habit or because it was one of the few currencies available to women in her position then.
Wrote those long, dreamy letters to soldiers, kept photos, made hopeful promises, maybe not always grounded in reality.
Wanted to marry, have kids, settle down, wanted safety, never got it.
Friends remembered her as kind, if maybe a bit distant, not loud or manipulative, just trying to belong, be loved, be more than just another pretty girl passing through.
She's buried back in Medford. Her family at the time likely didn't grasp the kind of dark fame she'd achieved. They just knew their daughter, their sister, Beth, the girl with bronchitis who liked the beach and disappeared far too soon.
She's remembered as an object, a symbol, a question mark.
But she was a person who deserved more. The greatest injustice, maybe, is that her real story keeps getting interrupted by the sensationalized one the world seems to prefer.
This brings us to how society viewed her, and women like her, especially after the murder. The victim-blaming aspect.
It kicked in almost immediately. Young, poor, alone, dressed well, moved around a lot, no husband or steady male protector. In the eyes of many back then, that made her inherently suspicious. Her murder wasn't just tragic, it was somehow explainable in their minds.
When the story broke, the first questions weren't just who killed her, but also,
who was she with? What kind of girl was she? What was she wearing? It's a pattern we still see, sadly, though perhaps less overtly now.
Elizabeth's short story got forced into these pre-existing archetypes, didn't it?
Familiar roles for women. She was cast as the vulnerable waif, the dangerous femme fatale, the fallen woman, the lonely dreamer, the reckless flirt, the manipulative seductress, sometimes innocent, sometimes a tease, sometimes practically inviting danger, rarely just a victim of a brutal crime.
The language used was crucial. Drifter, party girl, known to many men, unattached.
All euphemisms, really. Code for sexually available, which easily slid into the narrative of she was asking for it, both then and disturbingly sometimes still today.
Even some in the LAPD weren't immune, questioning her lifestyle, implying she got in over her head.
Essentially suggesting her death was somehow related to her own behavior, rather than solely the actions of her killer.
It's a pattern seen in countless cases involving female victims. The woman becomes the problem. Her choices become the justification. Her murder feels, to some, almost inevitable.
And the public often accepts it because it makes the story easier, more comfortable to process. If she was reckless, then it wasn't random violence that could strike anyone. It was a cautionary tale with a clear, albeit tragic, moral.
But that framing is not just inaccurate, it's cruel and dangerous.
It shifts guilt from the perpetrator to the person who was violated and killed.
Even today, discussions about Elizabeth Short often carry that hint of innuendo. Podcasts focusing on the mystery of her relationships, articles leading with her beauty, her clothes, the men in her life.
Rarely asking the harder questions. Why did nobody protect her? Why was she so isolated? Why is it still easier to dissect her choices than to confront the horror of what was done to her and find the person responsible?
Victim blaming isn't just a social failing, it's a form of erasure.
It rewrites the narrative, casts the woman as her own foreshadowing, makes her death make sense to a world that wants to avoid the real discomfort. That sometimes someone can do everything they can just to survive and still end up in pieces in a vacant lot.
Elizabeth Short lived in a time unforgiving to women who wanted more than was prescribed for them, and died in a city that could punish women simply for being alone. Decades later, we're still unlearning that ingrained reflex to question her before we question her killer.
So what does this case, this enduring story say about us? It didn't end just because the case went cold. It endured because we, collectively, kept it alive.
Thousands of unsolved murders, many brutal involving young women, most are forgotten. But not this one. Not Elizabeth Short, not the Black Dahlia. Why?
Why does her story persist? Why are we still talking about it, studying the crime scene, writing books, making movies, dissecting the files? Why is her face, usually smiling in those faded photos, still so recognizable?
The answer probably has less to do with justice for her, sadly, and more to do with culture.
I think so. The Black Dahlia became an icon, not because of who Elizabeth Short was, but because of what her story allowed us to project onto it. Journalists chasing headlines, men projecting fantasies, a city burying its rot under noir glamour, a public finding morbid fascination in an unsolvable mystery, even one rooted in real pain.
The story elements are seductive, aren't they? Beautiful woman, brutal unsolved crime, a dangerous city, a list of shadowy suspects, that poetic, dark nickname. It's perfect in narrative terms.
But perfect narrative isn't truth. What the Black Dahlia story says about us is often uncomfortable. It highlights how we consume violence, how we can sexualize tragedy, how we simplify real people into archetypes, how we sometimes blame women for their own vulnerability, and how often maybe we prefer a good story over a messy, unresolved solution.
The murder becomes a mirror. We look at Elizabeth Short and see the dangers of female independence back then, the potential cost of beauty, the dark fantasy of noir, the failure of institutions, the strange nature of fame arriving only after your voice is silenced.
Maybe the real reason the case never dies isn't just that it's unsolved in terms of evidence, but that it remains unresolved in us. We haven't let go because we haven't fully learned what her story should teach us. That mystery is often easier than truth. Remembering the symbol is more comfortable than confronting the complicated, fragile human being.
Elizabeth Short died in January 1947, but the Black Dahlia, that symbol, that puzzle, she lives on. Contrast that with Beth, the person quietly buried back in Medford.
The lack of an arrest, a trial, a final confrontation with the truth. That void is likely a huge part of why this story continues to haunt us. It feels fundamentally incomplete.
It reflects a time, a culture, a city of intense light and shadow. And in that space, Elizabeth became whatever people needed her to be: a mystery, a warning, a legend, but rarely just a person.
And there's a profound danger in that, isn't there? When we become more interested in the image of a woman than the woman herself, her real name gets overwritten, her life gets edited for suspense.
Bringing it back to the simple human truth. She was lonely, hopeful, probably scared, just trying to make it in a tough world. And she didn't.
What remains are fragments. Those photos, the letters, the contents of her suitcase, the rumors, that chilling image of a carved smile. And the question, which now really belongs to us, what does it say about us that we remember the murder far more vividly than the life?
If justice wasn't possible then, maybe dignity still is. By speaking her name, Elizabeth, Beth. By trying to tell her story without feeding the sensationalism. By seeing her as a human being who once lived and breathed and hoped.
Elizabeth Short deserved more than to become a myth. She deserved time, safety, the chance to grow old. She didn't get those things, but maybe she still has a voice through us remembering her name. Not a flower, not a fantasy, just Beth.